Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25, written about 3,500 years ago, says this to the nation of Israel. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has a discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has the discharge. Well, welcome to church. My name's Dave, and it's great to have you with us today. I don't even know where to go from there, but if you found yourself living in ancient Israelite context and you unfortunately experienced that, you were unclean. And David Garland, one of the commentators to the NIV application commentary from Mark, describes it like this: anyone who has contact with her, someone who's hemorrhaging nonstop, by lying in her bed, sitting in her chair, or touching her, becomes unclean and is required to bathe and to launder clothing. Her discharge of blood causes her to be discharged from society. So if you experience this, not only are you likely in great physical pain, but you're also in emotional pain. You are isolated from your community. You cannot go around anybody. You cannot go to crowds. You can't go to family meals. You can't hang out with friends. You can't go to synagogue, and you certainly can't show up to the temple for the Jewish festivals. It is quite a difficult and isolated existence. Now, if you're a Christian not living in the nation of Israel, we are gladly not under the Old Testament law anymore, because as we talked about last week, Christ has put an end to the old covenant, to the old law. But many of us have had experiences where we feel isolated, or we feel rejected. We feel like we've been away from community. We're suffering emotionally. You remember that time when you were in elementary school and you got kicked out of class and you sat in the hallway and you were just like, oh, I hope nobody walks by, I hope nobody walks by, and then that class walks by and you just kind of feel like, right? We've all experienced rejection. We've all experienced wanting to be around certain people or wanting to get invited to the party but not getting invited. And nowadays it's even worse, because we have these things right here called cell phones, where you can experience rejection not only physically but also digitally, whether it's text or social media or whatever it may be. We have all had that experience of rejection, and it is one of the most painful of all experiences. A while back, I was talking with someone who started attending the church, and she was sharing some of the struggles that she had experienced in her past. And I'll never forget what she said to me. She said, the first time I came to the church, I got outside of my car and I began to walk to the entrance. I wanted to turn around and go back to my car because I didn't feel worthy. And it's not that she had even experienced rejection or isolation from people, but she just felt like she had let down God. She felt dirty, she felt unclean, and she felt condemnation. So with all of that in your mind, with all of that as the background to the story that we're going to look at today from Mark chapter 5, beginning with verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. So here's Jesus. He gets out of the boat, and immediately he is encountering a large crowd. Now, I love in Hebrews, it says that Jesus has experienced all kinds of different temptations. He's experienced the temptations that are associated with being lonely and rejected and despised, Gethsemane. He's also experienced the temptations associated with large crowds wanting a piece of him, right? People lined up to want to receive a healing or a meal or one of his amazing teachings. So you've got all of these people who hear that Jesus has come, and he is suffocated by dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of people. And then all of a sudden, a synagogue ruler named Jairus came there. Now, Jairus, a synagogue ruler, would have been a holy man. He would have been a respected man. Oftentimes, when Jesus came in contact with religious leaders, it did not always go well for the religious leader. Right? There was conflict. Jesus would say, you're like a whitewashed tomb. And so when you hear this, or when you read this story, right away you might be thinking to yourself, this isn't going to go well for Jairus, right? But we discover that Jairus is a desperate man. So seeing Jesus, and because he's a holy man, he probably comes up and the crowd probably parts. Oh, there's Jairus. Everybody knows who Jairus is. They part. He makes his way to Jesus, and he falls at his feet, and he pleads earnestly with him. And these are the words none of us ever want to say. My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. And so Jesus heads with Jairus over to his home. So as Jesus is walking with Jairus and lots of other people, a large crowd followed, and they pressed around him. So the crowd maybe even gets bigger and bigger and closer to him. And then all of a sudden, a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. Now, we just read Leviticus chapter 15. This is a woman who is excluded, isolated. She is in pain emotionally, socially, spiritually, and probably physically. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. Now, some of you can relate to that, right? You've got a sickness and you've seen doctors and you've gotten surgeries and you've gotten medication, and yet it has only gotten worse, which just exacerbates it because now you're worse and your bank account is lower. She is literally desperate. So when she heard about Jesus coming, she probably ran as fast as she could. She came up behind him in the crowd. She touched his cloak because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Now, this word thought, it's in the imperfect tense, and it literally means because she kept saying to herself. So literally, you have a woman who is terrified because she's out in public. It's a large crowd. Jesus is a holy man. You got Jairus over there who's a holy man. And it's almost like she's trying to make sure that she doesn't talk herself out of it, right? Like if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. I just got to touch his clothes. I just got to touch his clothes. Don't back away. Don't go back home. Let's just keep on going. Let's keep on pursuing. And this word healed, it's the word sozo. It's a very common word in the New Testament. It's used 110 times. And it's usually translated save. Sometimes, 9 times it's translated make whole. 3 times it's translated heal. So this is a woman who wants to be sozoed. This is a woman who wants to be healed physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, because all of her is in great need of healing. So she goes up to Jesus, right? And again, she's hoping nobody sees her. Maybe she's like, down on the ground. Maybe she's on her knees. We don't know. She goes up to him and grabs his hem, grabs the hem of his garment. And immediately, her bleeding stopped. And she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. In an instant, her life changes completely. She is completely healed. Now, you might think to yourself, if you don't know how this story ends, or if you forget how it ends, you might think, well, that's probably the end of the story. She got what she came for, right? She got her healing. She's good. She can go back and go to church, go to synagogue, go to temple, have people to spend time with. Interestingly, just a chapter later, we learn in chapter 6, verse 56, that this sort of thing happened all the time. I mean, Mark tells us that wherever Jesus went, whether it was in the villages, the towns, or the countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed. And then Mark just goes to the next story. Like, Jesus doesn't end up having conversations with all of the people who grabbed his garment. And yet this one is different. This one's a little different. Because after she touches Jesus' garment and gets healed, the text tells us that at once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. And so he turned around in the crowd and he asked, who touched my clothes? Somebody touched my clothes. I felt power go out of me, and I want to find the person who did this. And the disciples were like, come on, Jesus. I mean, there are dozens of people pressing up against you. That's exactly what they said. You see the people crowding against you, Jesus? And yet you can ask, who touched me? But Jesus, he kept looking around to see who had done it, right? He's like up on his tippy toes. He's like looking down, right? Like trying to find out who this person was that received the healing. And the next part of this story is extraordinary. Then the woman knowing what had happened to her, what do you think she did? Maybe she was like, I am out of here. I am taken off. I am running as far away as I possibly can. Maybe like I'm bear crawling out of here so nobody can see me, because she is terrified. She is terrified that people are going to be like, that's the woman, and I touched her. Now I got to go bathe, and I got to wash my clothes, and I got to get ceremonially cleansed. Maybe she's thinking, Jairus saw this whole thing, and he knows I haven't been to synagogue in 12 years. Maybe she's thinking, Jesus is a holy man, and he's just going to condemn me like all the other Pharisees have condemned me. But that's not what she does. She displays extraordinary faith. And instead of slinking away, because she's used to being unseen, instead of slinking away, she came, and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. Now, I don't know what she told him. I imagine it was something like, I've been suffering for 12 years. I'm not really supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be excluded. I spent all my money on doctors. I am suffering, but I knew that you have the ability to heal. I've heard stories about you, and I am desperate. And what do you think Jesus said to her? Do you think he quoted MC Hammer and said, you can't touch this? Do you think he said, who are you, you unclean, walking, polluted person? Be gone. What do you think Jesus said to her? Well, if you know Jesus or you've been around Jesus, you've spent time with Jesus, spent time reading the New Testament, you have a pretty good idea what Jesus said to her. He looks at her right in the eye, and he says this, daughter. And when Jesus calls you daughter, or Jesus calls you son, it changes everything. It changes everything. And then he says this, your faith has healed you. Your faith has healed you. The reason Jesus went looking for her is because he wanted to close the loop. He wanted her to acknowledge who was the source of her healing. And she not only got physically healed, but she got holistically healed. And so he says to her, go in peace and be freed from your suffering. Go in peace. Receive the shalom of Christ, the wholeness and the healing of Christ. That's pretty awesome. Now, I don't know if Jairus thinks it's awesome. Maybe he does, but he's kind of waiting. You ever send a text message to somebody, and there's like the little, the whatever that's called, the 3 dots, and it's like doing the little roller coaster, and you're like, oh, they're going to respond. I wonder what they're going to say. Right? So Jairus is just waiting. And maybe he's thinking to himself, wow, that was awesome, because I know that lady, and I have not seen her for 12 years, and she just got her life revolutionized. Maybe he's pumped up. Maybe Jairus is like, hey, I was first in line, and she cut in line. She should have to go to the end of the line. Who does she think she is, right? We don't know what he's thinking, but he's waiting. And he's probably thinking to himself, at the very least, my daughter's dying. 12 years, like she can wait another maybe 12 days. My daughter's dying, Jesus. Do you forget about me? Because he's looking for her and he's having this conversation. The conversation was a lot longer than this. It's just Mark's trying to write as fast as he can, right? The text tells us that while Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead. And if you're a parent, that is the last sentence you ever want to hear. She's dead. So why bother the teacher anymore? But little did they know that Jesus was far more than just a teacher. He was also a healer. So Jesus just ignored what they said, and he told the synagogue ruler, Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe. In other words, if I could quote the band Journey, don't stop believing. Like, you showed up on the shore that day because you believed I had the power to heal your daughter. Don't stop now. There was just a little bit of an intermission because I saw somebody who was in need. There was a little bit of an intermission because I saw someone who was unclean and someone who was trembling, and I wanted to take care of her and close the loop and give her shalom. But let's go. We're going to continue this. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. These were kind of Jesus' inner three, his core group that he would take off every once in a while to do something special. They are about to see something amazing go down. Right? So when they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. I don't know if you've ever been in a room where someone has just died and people are wailing loudly. I was at a funeral one time where a young man in his 20s died of a heroin overdose, and I heard people wailing loudly, and it is eerie. It makes your stomach turn. It is awful. And that's what you do when a 12-year-old girl suddenly dies. So everybody's wailing and struggling, and Jairus is like, if you could have been here sooner, where were you? Right? So he went in and he said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. And interestingly, their wailing went to mocking because they just laughed at him. They're like, Jesus, we've shook her, right? We've yelled at her. We've picked her up, and she is cold. She's out. She's dead. She's gone. And after Jesus put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. Can you imagine the scene in this little room? It's just Jesus and a few of his guys and the mother and the father. Here's this little 12-year-old girl. We discover later on in the text that she's 12 years old. You have a woman who's hemorrhaging for 12 years, and now you have a little 12-year-old girl who's dead. And he takes her by the hand and said to her, Talitha koum, which is Aramaic, and it means little girl, I say to you, get up. Notice there's not like some big old prayer, some mumbo jumbo where he quotes all kind of incantations or uses all these famous phrases and sprays stuff on her and, does all, it's just little girl, get on up, get on up. And immediately the girl stood up and walked around, and she was 12 years old. And at this, they were completely astonished. And then Jesus gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and he told them to give her something to eat. Not amazing? Now, I think when Mark tells us this account, it's a sandwich, right? It's Jairus, who's a synagogue ruler, a man who is worthy of great social respect. And then you've got this woman in the middle, and then you finish it out with Jairus. And I think he's intentional about telling us that story in that way. Because Jairus, again, he's a male, right? In ancient Israel, males had more social clout than women. We know his name, and when you read the New Testament, we don't get many people's names beyond Jesus and the disciples. You usually get like the centurion, the demoniac, the boy's father, the son. We don't get a whole lot of names. The fact that we know Jairus' name means that he is a man of standing. He is a man who is respected. He is likely beloved. He's a man who's got a family. He's got religious clout as a religious leader, honor. He's probably got quite a bit of money, and he's seen to the point where everywhere he goes, he shows up on the shore that day, people just part. Oh, here's Jairus. Let's let him make his way in the middle. And then you have this unnamed woman, right? We don't even know her name. She's a woman. She's nameless. she's alone with zero prospects to ever get married because no one's going to touch her. Matter of fact, this is interesting. Many rabbis in Jesus' day wouldn't even touch a woman just in case she was on her monthly cycle. So they just kind of stayed away from them, let alone a woman who is constantly hemorrhaging. Nameless, she's alone. She is, if I could quote David Garland, she is walking pollution. No honor, she's broke, and she's used to being unseen. And most of us in this room, I should say many of us in this room, can relate to one of these. Maybe here you can relate more to Jairus. Maybe you can relate more to the woman. Many of us have experienced both of these. Like life was good, we were honored, job was good, school was good, I've got friends, I feel included. But then there's moments where you feel like the woman where it's like, I'm all by myself, I'm excluded, I'm in pain, I need healing, and I feel like God's abandoned me. Some of you can relate to going in and out of both of these types of people. But here's the amazing thing. Even though Jairus had all these things going on, that did not give him an advantage to seeing Jesus, to being healed. You know what got him healed or got his daughter healed? It was his faith, his desperate faith. And in the same way, this woman, all of her struggles, there's no barrier to Jesus. There's no barrier to Jesus. There's no advantage to who you are and where you've been. It's just about faith. Jesus is looking for people who have faith. And you say, well, what is faith? What does faith mean? Faith is, I'm going to pursue Christ because I believe he is good. And I'm going to come after him. And I believe he's going to give me healing. Maybe not in this life, the kind of healing that I want, the physical healing that I'm longing for. But I know that in the next life, he will make me whole. He will give me shalom. He will completely heal me. You see, for Jairus' daughter, she was just taking an afternoon nap, and Jesus raised her up. And that's a foretaste of, for you and I, one day we're going to meet Christ. And compared to eternity, death is like an afternoon nap. Here's what Garland writes: faith enables all honored and dishonored, clean and unclean to tap into the merciful power of Jesus that brings both healing and salvation. So here's the question I got for you. It's just one question I want you to ask yourself this morning. And it's this: do you have faith to ask Jesus for healing and salvation? Do you have enough faith to come to him? In a moment, I'm going to give some of you an opportunity to come forward. Maybe you're going to come forward for salvation. Maybe you want to come forward for physical healing, maybe mental healing, anxiety, depression. Do you have enough faith to throw a couple elbows along the way and make yourself come up front to symbolize coming forward to receive the hand and power of Christ? Here's the best news of all. We celebrate this every Sunday, that Jesus bled to death outside the camp. He was treated as an unclean person. And they said, you're so unclean, Jesus, that we're going to crucify you outside the city gate of Jerusalem. And his entire body hemorrhaged blood, and he never stopped it. And as the blood and the life drained out of him, and when he said, it is finished, and you put your faith in Jesus, you're made well, you're made whole, and you're made forgiven and given new life in Christ. Here's the way the author of Hebrews stated it. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. He gave his blood. He allowed his blood to be discharged fully and his life to be discharged fully so that it can make you holy, so that it can make you righteous, so that it can make you clean, so that it can purify you. Isn't that amazing? So the author of Hebrews says, so let's go to him. Let's go outside the camp. Let's go to all the other bleeding women and all the lepers and the outcasts and those who are socially isolated. Be willing to bear the disgrace that he bore. Be willing to bear the disgrace that Jairus was willing to bear by getting down on his knees as a holy man and saying, Jesus, I need you. For we do not have an enduring city, but we're looking for the city that is to come. Because there's a city coming. There's a city coming. You know what that city's called? Well, it's referred to in Revelation chapter 21 by the Apostle John as the holy city, the new Jerusalem, that one day, okay, think about this. One day, the heavenly Jerusalem is going to come down out of heaven. All of the saints who have gone before us, all of those who have been forgiven by the blood of Jesus will come down, dressed as a bride beautifully for her groom. And the woman who was hemorrhaging, I don't know if she later on got married, if she stayed single, but when Jesus comes back, she's going to be wearing a white wedding dress, dressed for the wedding day, the marriage supper of the Lamb, the return of Christ. The holy city coming down out of heaven from God. Now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. He will wipe this is a picture of the new heavens and the new earth, our final eternal destination. Every tear from their eyes will be wiped away. There will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, no more rheumatoid arthritis, no more asthma, no more stiff joints, no more cancer, no more mental anxiety, no more depression, no more hearts that are getting tired. There'll be no more pain. For the old order, this current order that we live in, this earth that is full of so much pain and heartache, it's all going to pass away. And when you die, it's like an afternoon nap. Because he who was seated on the throne will come back and he will say, I'm making everything new. I'm making your bodies new. I'm making this earth new. I'm making your relationships new. It's going to be perfect. It's going to be glorious. And I will reign with you forever and ever and ever. That's what you, Christian, have to look forward to. I hope you get healed in this life. And we're going to pray for you in just a few minutes. I hope you get healed. I hope we see miraculous healings. But the most important healing is to be healed for eternity that Christ wants to offer you. So, do you have enough faith to come to Jesus? Or are you too prideful? You think you figure it out on your own? Are you desperate enough to come after Jesus? He's looking for people who are desperate. People who have faith. So as James, a brother of Jesus, says, any one of you in trouble, he should pray. For some of you, you're just going to remain at your seat and you're just going to pray because you're in trouble. Some of you, you're feeling pretty good this morning. You're happy. So you might want to sing songs of praise as the worship team leads us in a closing song. Others of you, maybe you're sick. We're going to have some elders. A couple of us elders will be up here with oil for anointing, which the oil simply represents the Holy Spirit. You should call on the elders of the church to pray over you and to anoint you with oil in the name of the Lord. Because here's the truth. Here's the truth. We are a family, a church family that believes that Jesus still heals people. That he still heals people in this life. And ultimately, you will be healed in the next. So, whatever your illness, whatever your disease, whatever your level of anxiety, depression, whatever it might be, would you come and allow us to pray for you and allow us to encourage you and lay hands on you just as a way of saying we love you and we care about you and we want you to experience the presence of Christ. I want you to experience Jesus looking at you and saying, you're my daughter. You're my son. You're a child of the King. So go in peace and be healed. So let's do that. If you want to come forward, I'm going to ask the worship team to come up right now. We'll move the TV to the side. We're going to sing a song, and I just invite you to remain seated, to listen to this song, to pray, to call upon the Lord, pray for some of the people that are going to come up If you want prayer from an elder, just ask us and we would be happy to do that. But we're going to take about 10 minutes or so. And then we're going to hear from one of our international workers. So let's take about 10 minutes and let's pray for God to do a great work of healing in our midst. All right, let's do this. God, I thank